The clatter of a dropped fork on marble feels like a gunshot in a room dripping with diamonds and old money. They don't see the woman who bends to pick it up, not really. They see a uniform, a pair of tired hands, a name tag that reads Cat. They see a waitress. Whispers follow her like shadows. Can you believe she spilled water on Beatrice Sterling? Utterly replaceable. She's just a waitress. They have no idea the woman they dismiss is the one who owns the room, the building, and is about to own their futures. In 1 hour, the world will learn her real name, and it won't be Kat. It will be Catherine Vance, the billionaire CEO they're all here to impress. And she has been listening to every single word. The Gilded Sparrow was a cathedral built to worship wealth. Its vaulted ceilings adorned with frescoes that mimicked a Renaissance sky looked down upon a congregation of Manhattan's elite. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, cast a warm, forgiving glow that made diamonds sparkle brighter and hid the lines of age and avarice on the faces below. The air itself seemed expensive, a carefully curated blend of vintage perfume, seared scallops, and the faint, crisp scent of freshly printed money. Into this opulent theater moved Catherine Vance, known to its patrons only as Cat. She was a ghost in a black and white uniform, her presence acknowledged only when a glass needed refilling or a plate needed clearing. Her movements were economical and precise, honed by 3 weeks of grueling, invisible labor. She carried a heavy silver tray, its weight a familiar ache in her shoulder, a grounding reality in a world of pure illusion. Her focus tonight was Table 7, the Viper's Nest. Genevieve Beaumont sat at its head, a woman whose family had owned half of Park Avenue since the Gilded Age. Her posture was ramrod straight, her blonde hair coiled in an impossibly intricate chignon. To her right was Portia Croft, her laughter a sharp metallic sound, and to her left Beatrice Sterling, whose pout was a carefully cultivated art form. They were the queens of this particular chessboard, and they treated the staff like pawns to be sacrificed. Cat Genevieve called her voice carrying a lazy, imperious tone. She didn't look at Catherine, instead, examining her own perfectly manicured nails. This water is lukewarm. Are you trying to boil the lemon? Bring another, and more of those dreadful little breadsticks. Portia adores them for some reason. Right away, Ms. Beaumont Catherine said her voice a placid, neutral thing. She had perfected it. No emotion, no inflection. The perfect servant. As she turned away, she heard Portia's tittering whisper, loud enough to carry. Honestly, where do they find these people? She looks like she hasn't slept in a week, Beatrice added. Father says service standards are slipping everywhere. It's a sign of the times. No one values discipline anymore. Catherine's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second before she forced the muscles to relax. Discipline, she thought with a flicker of bitter amusement. They had no idea. The exhaustion they saw was real, but it wasn't from waiting tables. It was from running a multi-billion-dollar global technology firm, Vance Innovations, during the day, and spending her nights here in this gilded cage, hunting for a predator. 3 weeks ago, an anonymous tip had landed on her desk, a single encrypted message from a trusted source within her own security team. It alleged a high-level mole was feeding proprietary information about her company's revolutionary new project, Prometheus, to a competitor. The leak was slow, methodical, and designed to cripple them just before their landmark merger announcement. The tip pointed to a specific source, the casual, wine-fueled conversations happening right here at the Gilded Sparrow, a favorite haunt of her chief rival, Richard Sterling, Beatrice's father. So Catherine Vance, the wunderkind CEO featured on the cover of Forbes and Wired, had vanished. Officially, she was on a secluded strategic retreat. In reality, she had created a new identity, fabricated a resume, and gotten herself hired as a waitress. She needed to hear the whispers herself, to see the players in their natural habitat, to identify the traitor who was threatening to burn down everything she had built. She returned to the table with a fresh bottle of chilled mineral water and a basket of breadsticks. As she poured the water for Genevieve, her hand was perfectly steady, but her ears were straining, filtering through the symphony of clinking glasses and ambient chatter. A man at the adjacent table, Nathaniel Price, caught her eye. She had noticed him before. Unlike the others, he looked at her. He saw a person. He was younger than most of the patrons, probably in his early 30s, with a sharp suit that was well-tailored but not ostentatiously expensive. He had an intensity in his dark eyes that suggested a keen mind at work, but his smile, when it appeared, was genuine. He was often here meeting with different financial types, always seeming slightly out of place, as if he found the whole spectacle vaguely ridiculous. He offered her a small, sympathetic smile as Genevieve dismissed her with a flick of the wrist. Catherine gave a barely perceptible nod in return. It was a fleeting moment of human connection in a sea of transactional contempt. Her manager, a perpetually stressed man named Mr. Dubois, intercepted her near the service station. "Cat, the Innovators Gala is tomorrow night. We are fully booked VVIPs only. The entire mezzanine is reserved for Richard Sterling and his guests. I need you sharp. No mistakes. One dropped glass, one wrong order, and you're out. Understand? Understood. Mr. Dubois," she said, her voice still a flat line of compliance. "The Innovators Gala. It was the culmination of everything. It was being hosted here at the Gilded Sparrow. Richard Sterling would be here celebrating what he believed was his impending victory." Vance Innovations was the gala's primary sponsor, a bitter irony that tasted like acid in Catherine's mouth. The merger she had been working on for 2 years was with a legacy hardware company, a move that would solidify her firm's dominance for the next decade. Sterling's company, Sterling Dynamics, had been the underbidder, and he had been fighting her tooth and nail ever since. Later that evening, as she was clearing a table near the bar, she saw Richard Sterling himself enter. He was a man who consumed space with a broad chest, a booming voice, and an aura of predatory confidence. He joined 2 other men in dark suits, their backs to the room, their heads bent close together in conspiratorial intimacy. Catherine began wiping down the empty table, her movements slow and deliberate, making herself as much a part of the furniture as the polished mahogany. She was invisible, and invisible people heard everything. "The final data packet will be transferred tomorrow morning," one of the men said, his voice a low rumble. "It's the core of the source code. Once we have it, their Prometheus is just a paperweight." Richard Sterling chuckled, a sound like gravel grinding together. "Excellent. Their valuation will crumble before the gala even starts. By the time their CEO, what's-her-name, Vance, crawls out from whatever rock she's hiding under, I'll be buying her company for pennies on the dollar." The second man murmured something Catherine couldn't quite catch, but Sterling's reply was crystal clear. "The asset is getting nervous, but he's in too deep. He'll deliver. He'll be at the gala tomorrow night. We'll make the exchange then. It will be poetic." Catherine's blood ran cold. The asset, the mole. He would be here tomorrow night. She felt a surge of adrenaline, a cold, clear fury that sharpened her senses. They saw a waitress, a nobody, a piece of disposable scenery. They had no idea they were confessing their crimes to the very woman they were trying to destroy. She picked up the empty glasses, her expression unchanged, and walked back toward the kitchen, her mind already calculating, planning, and preparing for the war that would begin in less than 24 hours. The following morning, the city was a blur of motion outside the window of Catherine's small, anonymous apartment. It was a world away from her sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park, a deliberately chosen cloister where she could be Cat, not Catherine Vance. The sparsely furnished room was her war room. A corkboard covered one wall, crisscrossed with names, photos, and connection lines like something from a detective novel. At its center was a list of fewer than a dozen individuals, the senior executives at Vance Innovations, with access to the Prometheus source code. One of them was the traitor. Her phone buzzed. It was a secure message from Robert, her head of security, and the only person who knew the truth about her undercover operation. He was a former military intelligence officer, a man of few words and absolute loyalty. Financial forensics flagged an anomaly. Irregular payments to a shell corps linked to a senior engineer, Gregory Finch. Payments originate from an offshore account with ties to a known Sterling Dynamics subsidiary. It's circumstantial, but it's strong. Gregory Finch. The name hit Catherine like a physical blow. Greg was brilliant quiet and had been with her since the early days, a garage and ramen noodles startup that had grown into a titan. She had trusted him implicitly. The betrayal was a sharp personal sting far worse than the corporate maneuvering she had expected. But she couldn't let emotion cloud her judgment. She needed definitive proof, something irrefutable that she could use, not just to stop the leak, but to obliterate Sterling's entire scheme. She messaged Robert back. "Have a team ready. Silent surveillance on Finch. I need to know his every move tonight at the gala. I'll handle the rest." That evening, the Gilded Sparrow had been transformed. The usual hushed elegance was replaced with a thrumming electric energy. Blue and silver lighting swept across the walls, reflecting off the ice sculptures and champagne flutes. The air was thick with anticipation. Tech moguls, venture capitalists, and society figures mingled their conversations, a low hum of gossip and billion-dollar deals. Catherine, once again in her cat uniform, moved through the throng. Her invisibility was her greatest weapon. She was a silent observer in the enemy's camp. She saw Richard Sterling holding court, his daughter Beatrice clinging to his arm, both of them radiating smug triumph. She saw Gregory Finch standing alone by a pillar, looking pale and nervous, clutching a glass of champagne with white-knuckled hands. He looked utterly out of place, a man drowning in a sea he wasn't built to swim in. Her path took her past table 7, where Genevieve and Portia were already dissecting the other guests. "Did you see the dress on the CEO of Omnicorp?" Portia sneered. "It's last season's Dior. How tragic. And apparently the Vance Innovation CEO isn't even showing up." Genevieve added a malicious glee in her eyes. "Beatrice told me her father heard she's had a complete breakdown. The pressure finally got to her. The company's about to implode." Catherine poured their champagne without a word, her expression a perfect mask of polite indifference. Let them think that she thought. Let them underestimate me until the very last second. She felt a presence beside her and turned to see Nathaniel Price. He was holding 2 empty glasses. "Thought I'd save you a trip," he said, his voice a welcome note of warmth in the cold, transactional atmosphere. "Thank you, sir," she replied, her voice still in its waitress cadence. "It's Nate," he corrected her gently. "And your cat, right?" He gestured around the room. "Quite the circus tonight." "It's the Innovators' Gala," she said simply. "Right. Where everyone tries to innovate new ways to stab each other in the back," he said with a wry grin. "I'm here trying to secure funding for a clean energy startup. Feels like trying to sell vegetables at a candy store." There was an earnestness about him that disarmed her. For the first time in weeks, she felt a pull to be herself, to have a real conversation. "The world needs more vegetables." She found herself saying, a hint of her own voice slipping through. Nate's eyebrows rose in surprise and appreciation. "Exactly. See. You get it." He paused, studying her for a moment. "You know you have a very analytical way of observing things. I've seen you watching the room. You're not just serving drinks, are you?" Catherine's heart gave a slight lurch. Had he seen through her disguise? A waitress sees everything. "It's part of the job." "I suppose so," he said, though he didn't look entirely convinced. "Well, if you see any venture capitalists looking particularly bored with talk of AI and blockchain, send them my way. I've got charts and everything." He gave her another one of his genuine smiles and was about to say more when Genevieve's voice cut through the air like a shard of glass. "Waitress. We need more champagne. Are you being paid to chat or to serve?" Nate's smile vanished, replaced by a flash of annoyance. He turned toward Genevieve, but Catherine put a subtle hand on his arm. "It's fine," she murmured. "Enjoy your evening, Nate." She walked away, feeling his eyes on her back. The brief exchange had been a risk, a crack in her armor, but it had also reminded her of what she was fighting for. It wasn't just about source code and stock prices. It was about building a company where people like Nate, people with good ideas and genuine intentions, could thrive a world away from the petty cruelty of people like Genevieve and the rapacious greed of men like Richard Sterling. Her route took her near the mezzanine staircase, which was roped off for Sterling's private party. She saw Gregory Finch approach the velvet rope, his movements stiff and anxious. He spoke to the security guard, who nodded and let him pass. He was going to meet Sterling. He was going to make the exchange. Catherine's mind raced. She needed to get up there. She saw a service corridor at the far end of the room, one she knew from her staff orientation led to a back staircase used by the catering team. It was her only way in. As she moved toward it, she overheard a fragment of conversation from a group of tech investors. Heard Vance Innovations is hemorrhaging talent. Their big merger is on the rocks. Sterling's playing it smart. He's always 10 steps ahead. By morning he'll own the market. The narrative was set. The trap was sprung. Everyone believed she was failing. Everyone believed Richard Sterling was invincible. They were all in for a very, very big surprise. With a final determined breath, Catherine slipped into the shadows of the service corridor, leaving the glitz and glamour of the gala behind for the cold, hard reality of the fight that lay ahead. The invisible girl was about to become the hunter. The service corridor was another world. The opulent symphony of the gala faded, replaced by the clatter of dishes, the hiss of industrial dishwashers, and the clipped, stressed voices of the kitchen staff. The air was hot and smelled of grease and bleach. Here there were no illusions. This was the engine room that powered the fantasy outside, and for a moment Catherine felt more at home here among the steel and steam than she did in the ballroom. She found the back staircase easily. It was narrow concrete and dimly lit. Taking the steps 2 at a time, she ascended her soft-soled work shoes, making almost no sound. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of adrenaline and resolve. This was the point of no return. Every instinct she had honed from years of high-stakes negotiations and corporate gambles told her that whatever was about to happen on that mezzanine would decide the fate of her company. She emerged onto the mezzanine level into a small alcove hidden behind a large potted palm. Peeking through the fronds, she could see Richard Sterling's private party. It was a smaller, more intimate gathering of his inner circle. Richard stood near a panoramic window overlooking the city lights, a glass of what looked like single malt scotch in his hand. He looked like a king surveying his domain. Gregory Finch was there, standing awkwardly by the bar, looking even more pale and sweaty than he had downstairs. Catherine's eyes scanned the area, looking for the exchange. How would they do it? A USB drive, a file transfer from a phone. It had to be subtle. She watched as Sterling's daughter, Beatrice, glided over to Gregory. She placed a hand on his arm, her smile a predatory flash of white. "Gregory, darling." Beatrice cooed, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Daddy is so grateful for your contribution. He wanted you to have this, a small token of his appreciation." She handed him a sleek silver cigarette case. Catherine frowned. Greg didn't smoke. It was a prop. The data had to be on a micro drive hidden inside. It was old school, almost theatrical, a move born of pure arrogance. They were doing it right out in the open. Gregory took the case, his hand trembling slightly. "Thank you, Beatrice. Please tell your father." "He knows," she said, cutting him off. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go and gloat with Genevieve. I hear the big bad CEO of Vance Innovations was too scared to even show her face tonight." She laughed and walked away, leaving Gregory standing alone, clutching the silver case like a drowning man clutching a rock. Catherine knew this was her only chance. She needed that case. But how she couldn't just walk out there. Then her eyes landed on a catering cart laden with champagne flutes and appetizers, abandoned near the service entrance. An idea, bold and incredibly risky, sparked in her mind. She took a deep breath, smoothed down her simple uniform, and composed her face into the blank, deferential mask of cat. Pushing the cart before her, she rolled out of the alcove and into the party. Champagne she offered to a couple near the window, her voice low and unobtrusive. They took 2 glasses without even looking at her. She moved slowly, methodically, making her way across the room toward Gregory. He was still by the bar, staring at the silver case in his hand, as if it were a venomous snake. Richard Sterling was watching him from across the room, a smug, satisfied smirk on his face. Catherine was a few feet away from Gregory when it happened. A deliberate, calculated move. She stumbled, her body lurching forward as if she'd lost her footing. The catering cart tipped precariously. Dozens of champagne flutes cascaded to the floor, shattering with a deafening crash that silenced the entire mezzanine. Champagne and shards of glass sprayed across the polished floor. In the ensuing chaos, Catherine fell, aiming her body directly at Gregory Finch. She collided with him, not hard enough to injure, but with enough force to send him stumbling backward. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," she cried, her voice filled with convincing panic. The silver case flew from Gregory's nerveless fingers, skittering across the floor. In the split second of confusion, as all eyes were on the mess of broken glass, Catherine's hand shot out. Her fingers closed around the cool metal of the case, and with a movement born of desperate precision, she palmed it, sliding it into the deep pocket of her apron as she pushed herself up on her hands and knees. "You clumsy idiot," Richard Sterling roared, his face turning a shade of purple. "What is wrong with you?" "I'm so sorry, sir, I tripped," Catherine stammered, playing the part of the terrified, incompetent waitress to perfection. Security guards rushed forward. Mr. Dubois, his face a mask of pure horror, came sprinting up the stairs. "Get her out of here." Now Sterling bellowed, "She's fired, I don't want to see her face again." 2 guards grabbed Catherine's arms, their grips firm. This was part of the plan she had anticipated. Being thrown out was the perfect exit. But as they were hauling her away, she looked up and saw Genevieve, Portia, and Beatrice standing at the top of the main staircase, drawn by the commotion. They were looking down at her, their faces alight with cruel, undisguised pleasure. "Look," Genevieve said, her voice carrying across the now quiet room. "It's the clumsy waitress. I knew she was useless." Beatrice added a triumphant smirk on her face. "Some people just don't belong in places like this. They should learn to stay where they belong." The humiliation was a physical force, a wave of scorn washing over her. The guards were dragging her toward the service stairs, past the judgmental eyes of the city's elite. She kept her head down her shoulders, slumped in feigned shame. Inside her apron pocket, the silver case felt cold and heavy. It was the proof she needed. But the public degradation, the sheer delight they took in her supposed failure, ignited a different kind of fire within her. It was no longer enough to just expose Richard Sterling. It was no longer enough to just save her company. They had whispered that she was just a waitress. They had delighted in her fall. Now she was going to make them watch her rise. As the service door swung shut behind her, cutting off the sounds of their derisive laughter, Catherine Vance made a new, calculated risk. She wasn't just going to win. She was going to do it on the main stage under the full glare of the spotlights, and she was going to make sure every single person in that room remembered her name. The guards didn't bother being gentle. They shoved Catherine through the service exit and into the cool, damp air of the back alley. The heavy metal door slammed shut, its final echoing clang, a punctuation mark on her life as Cat. For a moment she just stood there, the reek of garbage and stale city air filling her lungs. The shouts and jeers from the gala were gone, replaced by the distant siren song of New York City. She reached into her apron pocket, her fingers closing around the smooth, cold metal of the cigarette case. She had it. A triumphant, feral grin stretched across her face, a startling contrast to the demure waitress she had been moments before. She had won the first battle. Now it was time to win the war. A sleek black town car with tinted windows pulled silently to the curb at the end of the alley. The back door opened and Robert stepped out. He was a tall, imposing man in a perfectly tailored suit, his face calm and unreadable, but she could see the question in his eyes. Catherine walked toward him, her stride no longer the shuffling, hurried step of a servant, but the long, confident gait of a CEO. She pulled the ridiculous, ill-fitting bow tie from her collar and tossed it into a nearby bin. "Did you get it?" Robert asked, his voice a low baritone. She held up the silver case. "Phase 1 is complete. Sterling just handed me the gun he plans to shoot me with." Robert nodded, a flicker of a smile touching his lips. He opened the car door for her. "Phase 2 is ready. The package is inside." Catherine slid onto the cool leather of the back seat. The car was a mobile command center. A laptop was open on a mounted desk, displaying streams of data. A satellite phone sat in its cradle, and laid out carefully on the opposite seat was a garment bag. "Finch," she asked, her voice now crisp and authoritative, all traces of Cat gone. Under surveillance, Robert confirmed, getting into the passenger seat. He's still on the mezzanine trying to explain himself to a very angry Sterling. They haven't realized the case is missing yet. They think it just got lost in the commotion. They're searching the floor for it. "They won't find it," Catherine said. She opened the case. Inside, nestled in velvet, was not a row of cigarettes, but a tiny, custom-built USB-C drive. "Plug this in. I want our best decryption team on it immediately. I need to know exactly what's on this drive before I walk out on that stage." As the car pulled smoothly into traffic, Robert handed a secure tablet to the driver, who immediately began running diagnostics on the drive. Catherine, meanwhile, turned her attention to the garment bag. She unzipped it. Inside was not a ball gown or a cocktail dress. It was a custom-made suit of midnight blue silk. The jacket was sharply tailored with powerful shoulders and a single, elegant closure. The trousers were wide-legged and fluid, commanding attention with every movement. Beside it lay a simple white silk shell top and a pair of wickedly high silver stiletto heels. This was her armor. The transformation began. In the moving sanctuary of the car, she stripped off the black and white waitress uniform, a costume that had been both her shield and her cage. She wadded it up and shoved it unceremoniously into a bag on the floor. As she shed the uniform, she shed the last vestiges of the meek, invisible woman she had pretended to be. She felt her spine straighten, her posture shifting back to one of command. She slipped into the cool silk of the trousers and topped the fabric, feeling like a second skin. She buckled the silver heels, the click of the clasps sounding like the loading of a weapon. She ran her fingers through her hair, shaking it loose from the tight, severe bun she had worn for weeks, letting it fall in soft waves around her shoulders. She took out a small makeup kit and applied a bold red lipstick, a slash of defiance. Looking at her reflection in the tinted window, she saw Catherine Vance staring back. The exhaustion was still there, etched deep in her eyes, but it was now overlaid with a diamond-hard resolve. This was the woman who had built an empire from nothing. This was the woman they had tried to break. Robert's phone chimed. He listened for a moment, then turned to her. "The team is in. The drive contains the final piece of the Prometheus source code, just as we suspected. But there's more. It's been packaged with a backdoor exploit. Once Sterling's team integrates the code, the exploit would have activated, giving them unfettered access to our entire network. It wasn't just theft. It was a Trojan horse designed to grant him total control." Catherine's blood ran cold with fury. It was a corporate decapitation strike. Richard Sterling hadn't just wanted to steal from her. He had wanted to seize her entire kingdom to enslave her creation to his will. "And there's something else," Robert continued, his tone grim. "The drive also contains a hidden ledger. Encrypted financial records. It details payments not just to Finch, but to 2 other key engineers we lost to competitors over the last year. He's been systematically buying my people and stealing my intellectual property for years." This was it. The smoking gun had turned into an entire arsenal. She had everything she needed. "Change of plan," Catherine said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I'm not just exposing the Prometheus theft, I'm burning his entire house to the ground. Get me a direct link to the gala's AV system. I want the contents of this drive ready to go up on the main screen." Robert raised an eyebrow. "That's aggressive." It's also legally complex. Let my lawyers worry about complexity, she countered. Richard Sterling started a war when he came after my company. Tonight, I'm going to end it. The car was now circling the block, waiting for her signal. Through the window, she could see the grand entrance of the Gilded Sparrow, the flashing lights of cameras as guests arrived and departed. Inside that building, they were laughing at a clumsy waitress. They were toasting the downfall of a CEO they believed was broken. They had absolutely no idea that the storm was just a few minutes away from making landfall, and that she was the storm. It's time, she said, her voice resonating with newfound power. Take me to the front entrance. Robert nodded to the driver. The car glided to a stop directly in front of the red carpet. Are you ready for this? Catherine Robert asked, the use of her full name a sign of the gravity of the moment. Catherine looked at her reflection one last time. The woman in the window was a stranger to the patrons of the Gilded Sparrow, but she was intimately familiar to Catherine. She was a fighter, a builder, a queen returning to reclaim her throne. She smiled, a slow, dangerous curve of her red lips. Robert, she said, I was born ready. The moment Catherine stepped out of the car, a subtle shift occurred in the atmosphere of the red carpet. The paparazzi who had been lazily snapping photos of minor celebrities and society figures suddenly snapped to attention. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Who was this woman? She had the unmistakable aura of power, the kind of magnetic presence that couldn't be faked or bought. Her midnight blue suit seemed to absorb the flashing lights, and her silver heels clicked against the pavement with unnerving authority. She ignored the clamoring reporters and the shouted questions, her gaze fixed on the grand entrance of the Gilded Sparrow. Her security team, discreetly positioned by Robert, materialized around her, clearing a path through the throng. She walked up the marble steps, not as a servant entering through the back, but as a conqueror arriving at the gates. Inside, the gala was in full swing. The master of ceremonies was on stage, a jovial round man who was in the middle of a canned speech about innovation and progress. And while we're all disappointed that the brilliant mind behind Vance Innovations, Catherine Vance, couldn't be with us tonight, that was her cue. With a subtle nod to a technician near the soundboard, one of her own people embedded weeks ago, the stage lights flickered and died, plunging the main stage into darkness. The MC faltered, tapping his microphone. A wave of confused mutterings swept through the ballroom. Then a single powerful spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the center of the stage. And into that circle of light walked Catherine. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. It was a profound collective intake of breath, a silence so deep you could hear the ice melting in 1,000 cocktail glasses. Jaws literally dropped. Wine glasses froze halfway to lips. At table 7, Genevieve Beaumont's face was a mask of utter, uncomprehending shock. Her mouth opened and closed silently like a fish. Portia Croft choked on her champagne, sputtering into a napkin. On the mezzanine, Beatrice Sterling, who had been laughing with a friend, froze mid-laugh, her face paling to a ghostly white. Her father, Richard Sterling, had been accepting congratulations for some imagined victory. He turned toward the stage and the blood drained from his face. He looked as if he had seen a ghost, a very angry, very well-dressed ghost. And near the back of the room, standing by the bar, Nate Price stared at the stage, his eyes wide with disbelief. He wasn't just looking at the CEO of Vance Innovations. He was looking at Kat, the observant, intelligent waitress he'd had a brief, genuine connection with. The puzzle pieces in his mind slammed together with dizzying speed, her watchfulness, her quiet intelligence, the sense that she was so much more than her uniform. A slow smile of pure, unadulterated admiration spread across his face. Catherine walked to the podium, her steps echoing in the cavernous silence. She moved with a fluid grace that was both elegant and predatory. She gently moved the flustered MC aside. "Good evening," she said, her voice calm, clear, and amplified by the microphone. It resonated through the room, a voice that held no trace of the submissive waitress, only the confident authority of a leader in absolute command. My apologies for the interruption, and for my tardiness. I was detained. You see, I've been conducting a little experiment for the past 3 weeks. She let her eyes sweep across the crowd, making eye contact with person after person, letting them feel the full weight of her presence. Her gaze lingered for a moment on Genevieve's table, then drifted up to the mezzanine, where it locked with Richard Sterling's. He flinched as if she had physically struck him. "I've been working here," she said, the statement landing like a bombshell, "at the Gilded Sparrow, as a waitress." A wave of shocked gasps and frantic whispers erupted. People turned to each other, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning horror, as they tried to place her, to remember if they had ordered her around, if they had dismissed her, if they had been cruel to the billionaire CEO of one of the world's most important tech companies. "You learn a lot about people when they think you're invisible," Catherine continued, her voice turning hard as steel. "You learn who is kind and who is cruel. You see what people are truly like when they believe no one of consequence is watching. But more importantly, you hear things. The most fascinating whispers." She paused, letting the tension build until it was a palpable thing, a thickness in the air. Richard Sterling was now ashen, his eyes darting toward the exits. Gregory Finch, who was standing beside him, looked like he was about to faint. "You see, I didn't take a leave of absence because of a breakdown, as the rumors so helpfully suggested," she said, her eyes boring into Sterling. "I came here to hunt a traitor, a snake who was selling my company's future from the inside. And tonight, thanks to the arrogance of the man who bought him, I found him. And I found so much more." She held up the small silver USB drive for the entire room to see. It glinted under the spotlight like a single deadly bullet. "They say innovation is about creating the future," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerously low pitch. "But some people are more interested in stealing it. Mr. Richard Sterling of Sterling Dynamics." She said his name, and it echoed through the hall like a death knell. The entire room turned as one to stare at the man on the mezzanine, who now looked trapped, cornered, his empire of arrogance crumbling around him in real time. "I believe you dropped this," Catherine said, a cold, merciless smile touching her lips. "And I think everyone here would be very interested to see what's on it." With a nod to her AV technician, the massive screen behind her, which had been displaying the gala's logo, flickered to life. The invisible woman was now the most visible person in the room, and she was about to put everyone's secrets on display. The massive screen behind Catherine lit up not with a corporate logo, but with the cold, sterile interface of a file directory. The room held its breath. This was no longer a gala, it was a corporate tribunal, and Catherine Vance was the prosecutor, judge, and jury. "Let's start with Project Prometheus," she began, her voice a masterclass in controlled fury. She paced the stage slowly, the silver USB drive held between her thumb and forefinger. "For 2 years, my team has poured their hearts and souls into creating a next-generation neural processing architecture that will redefine artificial intelligence. It is the culmination of our best work, our greatest dream. It is also apparently an irresistible target for thieves." On the screen, lines of complex source code began to scroll. To most in the room, it was gibberish, but to the dozens of tech executives and engineers present, it was the Holy Grail. Gasps rippled through the tech contingent. "This," Catherine said, gesturing to the screen, "is the core of Prometheus. Gift-wrapped and delivered to Richard Sterling tonight by one of my own senior engineers, Gregory Finch, in exchange for a shockingly small amount of money and a pat on the head." She paused, and her eyes found Finch on the mezzanine. The man crumpled, physically folding in on himself, as a low groan of despair escaped his lips. The spotlight of 1,000 eyes felt like a physical weight crushing him. "But stealing my code wasn't enough," Catherine continued, her voice dropping, drawing the audience in. That would be simple, brutish theft. Mr. Sterling is more ambitious. The screen shifted now, displaying the backdoor exploit, its malicious code, highlighted in red. An expert in cybersecurity whom Catherine had on standby began a remote real-time annotation, explaining in simple, damning terms what the code was designed to do. "This is a Trojan horse," Catherine explained, her voice ringing with contempt. "A digital poison pill. Had Sterling Dynamics acquired this code, they would have also acquired a key that would unlock my entire network. Every project, every employee file, every financial record. It wasn't a merger he was after. It was a conquest. A complete and total consumption of my company from the inside out." The mood in the room had shifted from shock to outrage. The people in this audience, for all their faults, understood the rules of the game. This was not business. This was a violation. Richard Sterling finally found his voice. "This is slander, lies. That drive is fabricated." He bellowed from the mezzanine, his face a mask of purple rage. "Security, remove this woman." Catherine simply smiled, a chillingly calm expression. "Fabricated. That's a very serious accusation, Richard. It's a good thing you're so meticulous with your accounting." With a final click, the image on the screen changed. It was no longer code. It was a ledger, a spreadsheet of offshore accounts, shell corporations, and a list of transactions. Names were listed next to dates and amounts. Gregory Finch's name was at the bottom, but above him were two others, talented engineers Vance Innovations had lost over the past year. And next to each transaction was the authorizing source, a holding company directly traceable to Sterling Dynamics. The evidence was irrefutable. It was a clear, multi-year pattern of corporate espionage. Richard Sterling had not just attempted a single theft. He had been bleeding her company dry for years. The room erupted. The low hum of chatter exploded into a roar. Richard's allies began to back away from him, creating a visible circle of isolation around the Sterling family. Beatrice looked at her father, her face a canvas of horror and dawning shame. Her world, built on the foundation of his supposed brilliance, was imploding. Genevieve and Portia, who had been so smug just minutes before, were now desperately trying to become invisible, their faces pale with the mortifying realization that they had publicly scorned and humiliated one of the most powerful women in the room. Their social standing was evaporating in the heat of Catherine's righteous fury. "My lawyers have already filed for an emergency injunction against Sterling Dynamics," Catherine announced over the din, her voice cutting through the noise like a razor. "And copies of this drive are now in the hands of the SEC and the District Attorney's Office. You aren't just losing a deal tonight, Richard. You're losing your company and your freedom." Security was moving now, but they were walking past the stage and heading directly for the mezzanine. They were not her security or the galas. Their jackets were emblazoned with federal insignia. Robert had made the call the second the ledger had been verified. As federal agents began to quietly and efficiently surround a stunned Richard Sterling, Catherine's eyes scanned the crowd one last time. They landed on Nate. He wasn't looking at the chaos on the mezzanine or the damning evidence on the screen. He was looking at her, and his expression was not one of awe at the billionaire CEO. It was one of profound respect for the woman, for the brilliant, courageous mind he had caught a glimpse of when she was just Cat. Her speech was over. Her revenge was complete. She had not only saved her company, but she had also exposed the rot that festered beneath the gilded surface of their world. She turned from the podium, leaving the chaos behind her, and walked off the stage. The reckoning was done. Now came the revelation of what came next. Catherine didn't linger to watch the fallout. She had no interest in seeing Richard Sterling's public disgrace or the frantic backpedaling of his allies. Her work on the stage was done. She slipped out through a side exit as federal agents formally escorted a pale, silent Sterling from the mezzanine. The gala, for all intents and purposes, was over. The biggest story in the tech world for the next year had just been born in a shower of broken champagne flutes and shattered reputations. She found herself in a quiet, richly decorated library off the main ballroom, a room she hadn't known existed. The sudden silence was a relief, a balm on her frayed nerves. The adrenaline that had fueled her for the last few hours began to recede, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. She sank into a plush leather armchair, the midnight blue suit feeling less like armor and more like a heavy weight. She had won. But it felt less like a victory and more like the end of a long, brutal war. The library door opened softly. Nate Price stood in the doorway, holding 2 glasses of water. He didn't say anything at first, just walked over and handed one to her. "I figured you could use this more than champagne," he said quietly. "Thank you, Nate," she replied, her voice softer now, without the hard public edge. She took a long drink, the cool water soothing her raw throat. He took the seat opposite her. There was no artifice between them, no pretense. The power dynamics were undeniable, yet he looked at her exactly as he had before, with curiosity and a disarming sincerity. "A waitress sees everything," he said, quoting her own words back to her with a small, knowing smile. "I guess that's the understatement of the century." Catherine allowed herself a weary smile in return. "I had a feeling you were more perceptive than most." "Not perceptive enough," he admitted. "I just knew you didn't belong in that uniform. I had this whole story worked out in my head. I thought maybe you were a journalist or a researcher writing a book about the 1%. I have to say, Billionaire CEO staging a one-woman sting operation wasn't on my list of possibilities." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the muffled sounds of the dissolving gala a world away. "Why are you here, Nate?" she finally asked. "Not running for the hills like everyone else." He considered the question seriously. "Because the woman I saw tonight on that stage was the same woman I saw get treated horribly by Genevieve Beaumont. The same one who told me the world needs more vegetables. The CEO part is a lot. I won't pretend it's not. But the person I think I had a pretty good read on her from the start." He paused. "And for what it's worth, Catherine, what you did tonight was extraordinary." Hearing her name from him without any title attached felt grounding. "It was necessary," she said, looking down at her glass. "He came for my life's work. I couldn't let that stand." "It was more than that," he insisted gently. "You didn't just protect your company. You held a mirror up to that whole room, to the way they treat people they think are beneath them. You gave a voice to every invisible person who serves them." Her eyes met his, and in their depths, she saw an understanding that went beyond the spectacle. He saw the cost, the loneliness of her position, the burden of her choices. "Robert is waiting for me," she said, though she made no move to leave. "There's a mountain of legal and PR work to do." "I'm sure there is," Nate said, "but mountains can wait." He stood up. "My offer still stands. If you ever find a venture capitalist bored of AI, send him my way." He started to leave, then hesitated at the door. "And Catherine, when you're done saving the world and all of that, I make a pretty good non-gala catered dinner. No shattered glass, I promise." He gave her one last genuine smile and left, leaving her alone in the quiet of the library. A small, real smile touched Catherine's lips. For the first time all night she felt a sense of genuine peace. The battle was won. Sterling Dynamics would be dismantled or sold for parts. Gregory Finch would face the consequences, but she would ensure he had a fair legal defense. He was a pawn, not a king. The merger would proceed stronger than ever on her terms. Her company was safe. But Nate's simple offer resonated more deeply than any corporate victory. It was a reminder that beyond the boardroom and the balance sheets, there was a life to be lived. She had spent weeks being invisible to find a traitor, but in the process, she had been truly seen by one person. She stood up, the exhaustion still present, but now mingled with a new feeling hope. She walked out of the library not toward her security team, but toward the grand entrance. The dawn was breaking over Manhattan, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. It was a new day, a new dawn for Vance Innovations, and perhaps for Catherine Vance as well. She had walked into the Gilded Sparrow as a waitress, a ghost in the machine. She walked out as herself, whole and unbroken, into the light. And that's the story of how Catherine Vance reminded an entire city that you should never ever judge a person by the uniform they wear. She proved that true power isn't about wealth or status, but about courage, intelligence, and the willingness to walk a mile in someone else's shoes, even if those shoes are the sensible, non-slip footwear of a waitress. Her story is a powerful testament to the fact that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous. What did you think of Catherine's incredible transformation and her epic takedown of Richard Sterling? Let us know your favorite moment in the comments below. Did you see the twist coming? If you enjoyed this story of justice and empowerment, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own hidden strength. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next story. Thanks for listening.